pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome everyone. I hope everyone had an awesome summer as we wind down, getting ready for the school year. I want to thank all the staff, all the parents, all the teachers. Welcome back. We're going to be starting our school year soon. I know they're doing a lot of good work in the off season with the facilities. And we look forward to everyone having a great start to the school year. With that, I move on to the superintendent's school.
Thank you, Mr. Pinto. As many of you probably know, we were the subject of a recent state audit. The audit actually the state audit is looking at a very narrow scope of district finances. And this audit looked at our fund balance and surplus for the years 2018 to 2022. It was a process that actually occurred over 2 years. There were some issues during the auditing process with particular workers who were working here. One unfortunately passed away during the process, so it took a long time. State workers, yeah. So the audit was published in Newsday. As I said in the last meeting, right after it came out, we have some concerns with how the audit was portrayed. We disagree with the audit on a number of counts. The state has a different perspective to some of these things than districts do at times. So we thought it would be a good idea tonight if we kind of went through the points of criticism and kind of our response to them, so that the community would have a good understanding of where we stand on it. So with that, I'll introduce Mr. DeVito, our Assistant Superintendent of Finance and Operations.
Thank you, Dr. Gallagher. Good evening, everybody. As Dr. Gallagher said at our last board meeting, we talked a little bit about the audit when it was just released, and now we have a chance to talk about it in a little bit more detail. This is still high level, so if anybody wants to see more of the detail, there's an 8-page response on the district's website that goes into all of these points that I'm going to be covering this evening in more detail with more data. But this is about a 15-minute presentation to cover some of the main points. So the audit report has some key findings, and I'm going to talk about those throughout this presentation this evening: the management of fund balance, the transfer of the surplus fund balance, the annual expenditure variance, the annual revenue variance, and the appropriated fund balance. So let's talk about the management of fund balance. The district exceeded the 4% limit for funds in the unassigned fund balance, which is similar to a general savings account that can be used for any purpose that the district maintains. Now what this 4% is the 4% of the following year's budget. So that changes year to year as the budget changes. So the law says that a district can have 4% of the following year's budget in this general savings account. For several years after Superstorm Sandy, the district had more than that amount in order to protect the district. And I stress that because it was something that was discussed openly. It was something that was done in consultation with our external auditor. And just as an example, it was mentioned in the management letter of our audit every year that we had done it. And as you see here, it says, as of June 30th, 2019 and 2018, the district's general fund unassigned fund balance exceeded the statutory limit by approximately $3 million. And that's the number that we kept it consistently because we're trying to, and again, hedge or protect the district against the possible loss of not receiving reimbursement of funds from FEMA and New York State. And that was real. At the time, we were in disputes with FEMA. They didn't want to reimburse us for some of the expenses that the district actually laid out for the recovery from the storm in our various buildings. We had an audit by the actual federal government of some of our submissions, and there were some disputes. They didn't like some of the backup. So we were really nervous that if the district didn't reimburse us, if FEMA and New York State didn't reimburse the district, that this whole amount in the 4% would have been wiped out, and we possibly could have had to owe them more than that because they were threatening to claw that money that we had already received. So in consultation with our external auditor, again, the district's external auditor supported this financial safeguard and mentioned it in the management letter. They said this is something you can do. And they also said, yes, it's a technicality, you're exceeding the 4%. You'll probably get some sort of a hand slap if the comptroller's office ever did it. But when comparing this to the possibility of wiping out the district saving account and actually having to owe more, it seemed like it was the right thing to do at the time. Fortunately, for the district, we did receive the money, we prevailed on those disputes, and then once we wrapped things up, this additional $3 million, or the amount over the 4% to protect against Superstorm Sandy, was reduced. We had some deductibles that we had to settle with the insurance companies because they didn't, give us everything we needed. At one point, FEMA in New York State said that they were going to reimburse us for those deductibles, and once it became clear that that was not possible, then we settled the amount that was over the 4% relating to Superstorm Sandy. How we settled it, I'm going to talk about in a minute. They also criticized us for, at the end of 2019, for having an operating surplus. It's no surprise that the district had an operating surplus at the end of 2019-20 because the district closed in mid-March of 2020 because of the pandemic, and there were about 3.5 months without standard expenditures. All the districts had not, for the most part, had an operating surplus. After the 2021 budget was adopted, the district realized that in order to support the projected expenses for a virtual school, for social distancing in the classrooms and other pandemic-related costs, that the budget that was adopted, and again, we adopted late because our operations were shut down, so everything was late in terms of adopting the budget and then wrapping up our operations and our financial statements for that year. We decided to increase the budget by $4,051,624. So this surplus, what happened to the money? Again, a question, what happened to the money? It was used to modify the budget for 2020, 2021. At that point, we still had the $3 million as that safeguard against a possible Superstorm Sandy loss. And then in the fall of 2020, we amended our budget and increased it by the surplus so that we had additional money for the pandemic-related costs. Again, we were open with the community about this. As we were talking about this, we did a presentation. On October 13, 2020, there was a public presentation entitled COVID-related expenses and budget impact to inform the community of the district's plan. Here's an excerpt from that presentation. You see the note here, the slide, it's an excerpt from the October 13, 2020 presentation. And you see here, we take everybody through where we were. This is from our financial statement. The start of the 1920 school year, the estimated operating surplus at the time, where we ended up, where we started the next year with this money, and at that point we were thinking it was going to be about $3.7 million. It turned out that we felt it needed over $4 million, and then what would be left, openly discussed with the community. At the close of 2021, the district ended the year with an operating surplus for a couple of reasons. The first is that we received some grant money from the federal government as part of the Educational Stabilization Act, or it's also called the COVID Relief Grant, of about $1.4 million that we didn't know we were going to get. So we were able to take $1.4 million of expenses and charge it or post it to that grant. So at that point, we at least knew we were going to have $1.4 million more than we thought. Also, we didn't actually spend as much as planned. So at the end of this year, 2020, 2021, the district also had about a $4 million surplus. And what we said we were going to do is we were going to use it towards capital projects. Throughout 2021, the district presented many iterations of the capital plan and settled on an $11.3 million plan that included new bathrooms at the high school, a steam to hot water pipe conversion at the middle school, new boilers at Lido in the middle school, and work in other areas in other buildings. Here's an excerpt from presentations in the spring of 2022 that explained to the community what projects we were going to do, the costs totaling about $11.3 million. You see it replace existing steam, heating system and hot water, partial air conditioning, replacing the boilers, things that were breaking down. We're having problems with our pipes in the middle school, especially after Superstorm Sandy. It accelerated the deterioration of those pipes. The bathrooms at the high school, we had to replace a rooftop air conditioning unit at West School, some gravel sidewalks At 90, we needed to put in a new sewer line and transportation. And we're also responsible for the infrastructure at the public library, and they had some HVAC units that needed to be replaced. This was discussed at length through this budget cycle. We were back and forth on which projects we were going to do, how much we were going to spend. But ultimately, the district decided, and again, this is another excerpt from the budget presentation, that we were going to use $4,285,400 from the surplus that we had. We were appropriating it, we were going to use it, and the rest, the $7 million, was going to come from our capital reserve fund. Again, this slide comes from budget presentations, not just once, but many times that we presented before the community about what we were going to do with the money that we had on hand. This talks about a meeting that we had with the auditors after the draft came out. Dr. Gallagher, myself, Dr. Ryan, met with the team from the New York State Office of the OSC's Office of the State Controllers, and we discussed the $4 million in surplus fund balance as a one-time expenditure for capital projects. I also sent the team emails. I sent them copies of the presentations. I created a binder. I had the binder with me last year, at the last board meeting, and I talked about this binder that had all these emails that I sent to the team, this comptroller's team, all the presentations. And I don't know why, but they just did not acknowledge that we sent it. They didn't acknowledge that these have been on the website all this time, that we actually presented it. This plan to use the money as a one-time expenditure that actually say in the report, the district should use surplus fund balance for a one-time expenditure. We talked about a year before they even came into the visit. And it's so puzzling to me why they didn't acknowledge that in their report. We mentioned it, we talked about it in a meeting with them, and again, they just didn't include it, and I don't have a good answer why. Here is where that number is in the budget. We always put a line-by-line budget. This is the line-by-line 22-23. Here's that $4,285,400 number. The public actually voted on this. It was in the line-by-line. It was in all of our public materials that it was okay to put that surplus fund balance as a budget line transfer to capital for facilities. Always very open and transparent. Another item that they criticized us about was our annual expenditure variances. So variance is the difference between what's budgeted and what's actual. 2018-19, we spent 97.8% of what we had budgeted. The variance was 1.6%. What does that mean? That means that if you had a budget, let's say in your household, for $100, and you spent 97.8%, and 60 cents you were going to put to the next year because you were going to use those for next year's expenses because you already ordered it, but they hadn't come in yet, you couldn't settle the invoice, and you were left with $1.60. They criticized us for that. Very puzzling. I just want to skip these 2 years for a second. 21-22, 22-23. Here, we spent 98.1% of what was budgeted, and we were left 1.4% left over. Again, if we're talking about $100, we spent $98, and we left over just a little over $1. And then this last 22-23, we spent 99.2%. 0.6% is what was left over. And they said in their recommendation, the district needs to do a better job at planning their budget because of what was left over. These 2 years are the COVID years. This is the year that we ended 3.5 months early. This is the year that we developed a virtual school. We hired a bunch of teachers, and we were preparing for a lot of expenditures, and we had some leftover money. I think anybody would understand that even these 2 years, these 2 COVID years, ending the year with a 3.8% or 4.9% out of 100 is still reasonable considering the context. And pre-COVID and post-COVID, I think is extremely reasonable. When we asked the auditors, the team, well, how much better can we do? What would that number look like? They didn't answer us. They didn't give us an answer. One of the items that they criticized us for was how we budgeted for health insurance expenditures. They said, you should be looking at historical data. There were a few years here where we had a bit of a surplus in this line item. They talked about benefits, but really the main driver of benefits is health insurance. And if you take a look here, 2018-19, 2021, we had budgeted here 16.2 million, here 16.8, and here 16.2. And the actual expenditures came shy, 14 and a half, or just shy of 15 million. What was happening in these years was that there was a very low rate increase, and one year actually the rate went down. Okay, happily surprised that we had money to use for other things. Most of the money here was used for other purposes like covering special ed expenditures that we weren't expecting, transportation expenditures, some special education students that we didn't expect. So it was transferred into those other codes. They criticized us and said, you should use historical data, averages of the historical data. I said to them, we don't know what the health insurance rate is going to be that following January. There have been times it's gone up 10%, back going 8, 9 years ago, and most recently. So I created this model to say, if we did what the audit team had suggested, what would that have looked like? And every place where you see red is where we wouldn't have had enough money if we did what they said we should do. Whether it's based on a 3-year average or a 5-year average, we wouldn't have had enough money to cover the expenditures. So to use the historical expenditure average doesn't make sense in something like health insurance where it's exact. It goes skyrockets to over 10%, and then some years, not that it happens very often, but the rate increase is very low, even had a decrease. Most recently, we've had a couple of years in a row where it's been over 10%. And we see we had enough, barely, we were just shy, a small percentage, but if we did what they said, we would have been short 1.3 or $1.6 million, depending on whether we used a 3-year or a 5-year average. When we spoke about that with the audit team, again, they just pretty much shrugged their shoulders and didn't really have an answer. When we countered some of their points with data, with examples of if we did what they suggested we do, they kind of said, well, we can't tell you what to do. It makes you think that they really weren't looking at our data and our contacts and just going with some predetermined outcomes and template that they were using. The second to last item is the annual revenue surplus. Similar to the expenditure variance, they said, too much of a variance here. The difference between budget and actual is too great. Again, I'd say to the board, if anybody who's listening, to come within 99.64% of the projection, how much better can we do? We were over a projection by 0.36%, over our projection by 0.48%. Again, we have a couple of years that it was about 2, but I would also argue that even a 2% variance here in terms of getting money earned that we projected is still very reasonable and shows accurate planning. Appropriated fund balance. So here's another area that's a little tricky, so hopefully everybody can stay with me. If the district ends the year with an operating surplus, it can use or appropriate is used interchangeably, some or all of that surplus towards the following year's spending plan. So you have some choices with appropriated fund balance. You can use it to offset the tax levy, which is, again, what the auditors have suggested that we do. Just parenthetically, they also suggested that we do that in years where we had that other surplus that we used for capital projects, even though we had a 0 increase in our tax levy. So we had a choice. Should we reduce the tax levy below 0 and not do those capital projects that we planned, or do we at least keep a 0 where there's no increase and use that surplus to fund capital projects? We thought we were making a responsible decision, keeping a 0 2 years in a row and using the surplus fund balance from the COVID years towards capital projects. Audit report disagreed with that. So another point here is in terms of estimating projected state aid and other revenues such as tuition from other districts and interest income. The district relies on the tax levies to support annual expenditures. Appropriating fund balance is a mechanism to offset the tax levy. So what did the district do over the past several years? We took about 351,000 to a little over a million, again representing 0.25% or 0.68% of the budget respectively, to appropriate to lower the tax levy. So instead of going out for, let's say, a 1.9, we can go out for a 1.5. Or instead of doing a 0.3, we went for 0. And that's really what that means. As we said, we'll take some of the annual operating surplus, and we'll say we'll use some of it to support the following year's spending plan. The audit report criticized us for not spending into this 0.25% or 0.68%. What that means is they said that if you don't spend some of this, you're misrepresenting to the community that you have a deficit when you're really going to have a surplus. So what this means is that if we didn't spend, again, going forward to that $99 out of 100, $99.75, if we didn't spend $99.80, we're giving a misrepresentation to the community. Contrary to the assertion of the audit report, I think appropriating an extremely small amount of fund balance to offset the tax levy and support the following year's expenditures does not give taxpayers any false impression of the district, and that it does not spend that small amount of the fund balance. Not using 0.25% or 0.68% of the overall revenue projection to support an annual spending plan should have been applauded as careful spending, whereby districts that only spent what they needed and did not need to spend every dollar that was allocated. When we talked about this with the audit team, saying some districts appropriate millions of dollars, 3 million, 5 million, we're appropriating between 350,000 and a million to offset the tax levy, and you're criticizing us for not spending into this. It just doesn't seem reasonable. But that's their findings. That's a summary of our disagreements. And now's the chance to take questions and comments from the board.
Mr. DeVito, thanks again for your presentation. I mean, just the fact that you have all this data of things that you presented gives a great explanation of the level of transparency that you present to the community and that your team presents to the community. We have full of faith in all the efforts you did over these years. I mean, looking back at this whole audit process, the fact that it took a few years for them to complete it, it goes back a few years, that not the current status of the district. The fact that we used the money that they said that we had too much of for reasonably smart decisions that improve the district, that provide educational purposes. There's a lot of questions and concerns from our side about how this all came about. But one of our questions that we don't have is the fact that we do know that you presented this to the community openly. The fact that you have it all to present is very, I guess, satisfying to us that you were doing your diligence and the district was doing their diligence, your team was doing their diligence, and making sure that all the money was properly spent and it was presented in an open fashion. The fact that we actually followed these years with 0% tax increases and they didn't even look at that as something that we were doing to be fiscally responsible, to us brings questions to how this whole audit took place and how it ended up. But I just want to reiterate and speak for myself, and I bet the board agrees that we continue to have faith in everything we did over these years, everything we did as a team. And the way you presented it today, it obviously makes sense that we were doing everything in good faith with great objectives. And you pulled off very challenging years, whether it was battling for reimbursements that we were unsure of, or if it was us modifying budgets in a lean, fiscally manageable way during the COVID years when we had so many uncertainties. I just want to reiterate our confidence in you, and I thank you for that and to your team.
Thank you very much.
I echo your sentiments. Thank you, Mr. Pinto. I have just a couple things. So last week we had our auditor, it was last week or the week before, I think, meeting before, we had our auditor come in. And one thing you didn't touch on is that our auditors made recommendations that we followed, or maybe you did follow them and look at that or hear that. But I just wanted you to maybe reiterate that one more time and just share what that exactly means, because this was, two separate views.
Sure. So when we were, on the line for millions of dollars in terms of getting that money back to the district after Superstorm Sandy, I said to our external auditor, the firm is Coleman Danowski, what could we do to protect the district in case they don't reimburse us the money? I said we only have this 4%, which, depending on the year, is between $5 and $6 million. And we had a lot more outstanding that was due to the district at that point. And the auditors had said, well, you can keep a little bit more in your unassigned fund balance. The limit is 4%, but there's no penalty, there's no fine, there's nothing that can really be assessed against the district for doing that. Excuse me, it's just, you'll get a slap on the wrist. But considering and weighing the two alternatives of a slap on the wrist for not sticking to that 4% limit or putting the district at fiscal stress, if we didn't recover all the money that we were due to recover from Superstorm Sandy, the auditor agreed, and after discussions in public and with the board, we all agreed that this made sense. When that risk was no longer present, we didn't keep that $3 million anymore. We settled, that was about $1.2 million in terms of deductibles that we needed to settle, because at that point, we gave up. We said, we're not gonna pay that money. So we needed to settle those deductibles. So that left about, $1.8 million left. And that was part of the funding that was used for those capital projects at that point. But it was something that was public. We talked about it, and I said this before, Maureen Brona, that was one of the things that she kept raising all those years. Can you please explain, can you please talk about the money that you're holding, that the district is holding in the unassigned fund balance, and why? And why that was careful, prudent, conservative, financial management. And the auditor never said, don't do it. The auditor didn't say, don't keep what's in there. It was acknowledged, it was an open comment, but it was never, don't do that. It was something that was done for a reason. And there was an article in the Newsday a couple of weeks ago about all the districts that have more than their 4%. So, they featured a few districts who had reasons, not Superstorm Sandy, but they had their own reason of why they felt it important to protect their district, to keep more money than the 4%. And it was highlighted in that Newsday story. We were not listed because, the past couple of years, we didn't have more than the 4%. So this, in a sense, is old news, it's historical, but for the audit report, because they were covering a 5-year span, it was included in the audit, but for the, past couple of years, we didn't. Once it became clear, once we got the money from FEMA, we're almost out of that FEMA reimbursement stage. We only have a very small amount left of that, a little over $1 million, and it's because of the work that we did in the boardwalk, boardwalk out into the ocean, into the bay at 90. Everything else that we prevailed on successfully and got that money back to the district. And even the comptroller's office has a fiscal stress scorecard. One of the items in there is how much money you have in your unassigned fund balance, and do you have up to the 4%? And they ding you in your scorecard if you don't have the 4%. So, it's kind of interesting that here what we were doing was to protect the district from not being in fiscal stress, and yet we're criticized for it in the audit report.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because it sounds like what they're looking for you to do is land at a zero. And anyone who does any budgeting, whether it's for your groceries or your home, knows that you never really want to budget for a zero because there are unforeseen expenses. It is interesting also, though I wasn't on the board during the time period that this audit was looked at all the years, these were really not traditional years. They're very outlier years. And I remember sitting here as a community member, and one thing I do always remember is you talking about fund balance, and me always thinking, what is this fund balance? And I want part of the fund balance. I want it. So I thought you were saying fun. But thank you, because I think you've always been extremely transparent as, as sitting in the community and also now as a board member, and it's just unfortunate the way that they worded everything, but thank you for clarifying that point, because to me, that's a very big point, is that we were being led to do something, or at least it was an understanding of why we were doing it, and we did not acknowledge that.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Lee. I'd like to step through some more questions. How often is the district audited by the controller's office?
Well, they say they do it every 8 or so years, but it's been more than that since our last audit by the controller's office. So maybe every 10 years they do it. They try to cycle through, but I think they're a bit short-staffed, so perhaps it's a longer cycle now.
Will the cycle begin 4 years ago at the inception, or will it begin termination presently?
I don't know the answer.
My second question is next May, when we're looking at budget and finance in terms of proposing a budget to the community. And if in fact, the board says, well, let's use fund balance to bring it down under 2%, what's your recommendation going to be?
Well, it's interesting, right? So I just want to go to that last slide for a second. Up until receipt of this report, I would have said be conservative with the use of appropriated fund balance. And I said that all along because it's not a recurring revenue source. You use it once, and if you rely on that for operating expenses, you're going to have to come up with that the following year. So I would have said keep it low, anywhere between 350 or $1 million. I thought was reasonable. This year that we have is a little bit more. I think it's 1.4 million. But I'd be cautious about that. But based on their recommendation, to me, what they said in the report is that don't appropriate any at all if you expect to end the year with a surplus. Now, we don't want to end in a deficit. We hope to end the year in a surplus. We don't try to end the year with a big surplus. And again, we run a tight operation, except for the COVID years, understandable. 1%, 1 to 2%, I think is reasonable. But based on what the audit report says, is that if you appropriate any fund balance, and if you don't use it, you're misleading the public by saying to them that you're going to be in a deficit if you're not in a deficit. But if you're so tight, and if you come within, 0.25%, which is very hard to run like that and not be in a deficit where you don't go over this with a $150 million budget, I'd have to really think hard about that. And I don't have a good answer for you today, how much we would appropriate next
Yeah, I don't need to put it on you, because
Okay.
ultimately it's on us.
Right.
Right. Either of us sitting up here, but I'm just curious about that.
I've been thinking about it,
Yeah.
and I'm wrestling with it. That's my understanding. So I'm wrestling with it.
I just want to point out in the spring, when we were having difficulties concerning funding, right, whether it was foundation aid or lack thereof, this came up publicly. And people in the audience wanted to know, would board members resort to fund balance in terms of funding? And I specifically said no, right then and there. So I do agree with the state, but in my closing remarks, I just want to say, since I am sort of the dinosaur up here, that the last 12 years have been extraordinary here in terms of FEMA. And I don't have any second guessing on my role as a board member in terms of how we funded the school district. Because we constantly bombarded you with questions about FEMA, and did we get reimbursement or not? We always needed that extra money just because of the fact that we thought we might not get it in terms of that. So like Mr. Pinto, in this case, I have confidence in you. I certainly have confidence in those who have come before us on this board in terms of the financial decisions we've made for the economic health of the district. And thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Kelsey?
Yeah, just a couple things. First off, I think we were all a little bit shocked when that report came out, and you were so eager to let everybody know exactly what was going on here. So you've been completely transparent with us, and I appreciate all of your hard work. This is not my wheelhouse. I'm not a numbers person, but you go over it line by line by line, and we get it. So I thank you for your hard work, and I'm sure this will all work out.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Ms. Conway?
Mr. DeVito, thank you so much for your presentation. If you remember at our last public meeting, you mentioned how we discussed budget for 9 months, basically. We started in November and we ended in May. You came last time to the public meeting with a huge binder that you said you showed to the state. What I don't understand is, and I guess I agree with you, is why won't the state listen to what you're telling them? Or to what our auditors have told us to do? Why is the state saying, nope, we don't want to listen to you?
I don't have a good answer. I can just tell you what the experience was for our team when they did the audit is they would ask for specific documents and we gave it. When I would try to share other things with them and said, oh, we got it, it's on the website, or we'll take it off the website, or yeah, we saw it on the website. So I was very surprised when I got a draft that was almost exactly identical to the final report with some of the language that was used. And I said, wait a minute, how can you use that kind of language? And I sent them emails, and I must have sent them about 6 or 7 emails over a 2 or 3 week period, giving them excerpts from the presentation. Look at what we said here. And I just highlighted a couple of them here.
Everything.
Look at what we said over here. Look at what we talked about publicly over here. Look at the discussion about all of the items that they had, where it showed that we were open, we were transparent, and we shared information with the community, and they didn't change it. It made me personally kind of lose confidence in the process, right? Because I felt like, where's the integrity in the process? Where's the give and take here? I mean, we acknowledge that, yes, we went over that 4% for several years. We had good reasons that we felt were justified, but yeah, there is a 4% limit out there. And again, like there was in that Newsday article a couple of weeks ago, 20 or 25 other districts also said, yeah, we don't think this 4% limit is really working for districts anymore because of various reasons. We had our reason, okay, yes, you're within your right to, admonish us or, give us, anyway, some sort of a statement about it. But a lot of the other stuff about appropriated fund balance, about the variances, we're not, even during the COVID years, things of that, it makes you like, really, like, wow.
It doesn't seem to make a
No,
lot of sense.
and it makes you think that there's something else going on. I don't necessarily want to say what that is, but it makes you think that there's perhaps some other agenda happening here with that office, or that's all I'm going to say about it. But it makes you wonder. It makes you wonder what's really going on.
Well, when you said that they said to you, if you don't use it, then you need to give it back to the taxpayers, we do give everything back to the taxpayers. And I mean, I'm just thinking about the capital projects that
Right.
we've done have been only because we've had those
Right.
funds to use. The bathrooms were so necessary at the high school, and they've made such a huge difference for our students and for our staff. When the boiler broke, thank goodness we had those
Right.
reserves, because you had the means to help restore the heat and to restore the middle school building. When the roof leaked, and honestly, I could go on and on and on about what's happening, what happened to our buildings. You will find that other districts in New York State and surrounding states are suffering right now with their infrastructure because they don't have enough funds to fix their buildings, to maintain their programs, and to ensure the safety of all of our students and our staff. And, Mr. DeVito, during COVID, I remember quite succinctly how you were enforcing the safety of our students and staff. And you were there on the job, making sure that everything that you had asked for capital projects, to ensure that the buildings were just right, were there. And your staff, they were amazing. I remember the flooding that happened at the high school, you couldn't even drive your car through. Mr. DeVito was able to work with other people to help ensure that, flooding wasn't gonna happen anymore, you weren't driving your car through 3 feet of water. So we do give everything back to the taxpayers and to our students to ensure our buildings and our programs are maintained and they keep their integrity.
And I just want to piggyback on that point for a second, Mrs. Conway, and that's a balance we always do, right? So during those 2 years, I think it's important to say it again, we had 2 0% increases, right? And because I said to the board, and I remember there was some conversations that we had, well, do you want to do a 0.5%? I said, we don't need to, we can do a 0. We can do a 0 again. But to reduce it below a 0 and not spend money on capital projects, that's that balancing that we always have to do. Again, how much do we ask the community for in terms of tax levy? And what do we need to reinvest into our buildings to make sure that they're functioning properly? And we do that every year. The other thing too is, this is a little bit more technical, that if we had reduced the tax levy, it would have impacted what we could raise in the future, because our base would have been lower, which is something that is not always advisable. One other thing I wanted to say is that if we had that 4 million, that we ended that second year, because the first year, the 4 million was used to amend the budget, and that second COVID year, we used that 4.3 million towards capital projects. If we had said we were going to lower the tax levy by 4 million, what it equates to really is that for the average taxpayer, for school tax, they would have had maybe around a $250 reduction in that year's school tax. So when you compare that small amount, which again, every dollar counts, or taking that money, that's why we have public entities and using it to put in new bathrooms at the high school, to fix the steam leaks in the middle school, to convert to hot water, replace the boilers, that it would have even been worse if we didn't do it, right? We think it's a worthwhile use, and we did, again, what the audit report says, use that money for a one-time expenditure. They list that as one of the viable options. Why? That's what we did, right? Why they didn't acknowledge that as something that is part of their menu of things to do, again, I don't have an answer.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Just two more things. First of all, the years that we had the zero, if I remember correctly, it was also because the community was bearing a burden of
That's right.
very large tax increases from the city, and we were trying to, I was on board one of those years, I don't recall, but it was discussed to be very mindful of the taxpayer at that time. The other thing, and I think Ms. Conway brought it up, how many hours our internal auditors, when the people that we employ to come and audit us, how many hours, I remember you went over that, but do they actually work, or maybe she had said, did she say 400?
400 hours.
Right, so 400 hours of our own auditors overseeing what we're doing here as well, so, you know,
Right.
it's not.
So we have three auditors, right? We have the internal auditors that spend the 400 hours.
Yep.
We have the external auditors that look at our financial statements and make notes about, and mind you that, and those years with that comment, that was the only comment that they had, right? Then there's what's called the claims auditor, where they look at every payment that we make to every vendor and make sure that the proper backup is there. And then there's this comptroller's office that's outside, right, through the state that visits districts every 10 or a dozen years. So there are lots of auditors who are looking at what we do and make sure we have the right controls in place, that our financial statements accurately represent the activities of the district, and that every time we give a check to anybody, that the backup is there to show that it's a justifiable expense.
Thank you for clarifying that for the
Sure.
community too, because I think that's really important for people to understand. Thank you.
Any other board members, any other comments or questions?
Just two stuff. One is, did you see any truth at all to anything that the auditors claimed in terms of the presentation?
Yeah, I think that we did go over the 4% limit. That's a clear one. This one I have a hard time with, saying that, you know what, like, to me, when we appropriate fund balance, it's like, all right, we ended the year with an operating surplus. We know how much we're getting from state aid, or expect to get, it's never really a definite. We know how much we're gonna levy from the community. We don't really know how much we're gonna get in terms of tuition or other things. That's a bit of an unknown. But to balance things, like zero to present a balanced budget, we're gonna use a very small percentage to balance it, just in case we need it, and then if we don't need it, we're criticized for that. I have a hard time with that. The variances, could we bring the 2.26 down to 0.48? Maybe. We can do something to do things a little tighter like we did here. There was some tuition that, you know, we weren't expecting from Island Park here. Maybe we could do here. I disagree. I don't know how you use historical averages for health insurance when it's exact all over the map, that we need to protect the district in case it goes 10%, 10%, 10%.
Of course, the other thing too is this cutting program, right?
Right.
In terms of that, just making severe cuts in programs. Oftentimes, we're very, very loath to do that because of parental concern, because of teacher concern and administrative concern. My second point is, I suspect, and I just wanted to clarify that I was in that meeting with yourself and the superintendent when they came. They've been here so long, what I'm going to say in the spring, maybe in the summer. I just got the sense from them that they weren't going to change at all. I admired your dutiful nature to provide them with anything and everything that they needed. But I got no sense at all that they were going to pay attention. I got the only sense that they were going to say what they said in the initial report. They weren't going to make any changes. And I wasn't surprised at the final draft because I was sort of I think, attuned to their attitude at the time. And that sort of concerned me. But my question is, you belong to the consortium, I guess, of business people. And I suspect other districts get this in terms of, audits. I suspect the state feels they have to find something.
Yeah.
If they're gonna send somebody here for 4 years, they gotta come up with something, because they're not gonna go back to Albany and say everything's fine. What he's spent 4 years there for, in terms of that line up here in Albany. What are you, the business officials gonna do in terms of the process? Because you mentioned specifically in your presentation, you're sort of disappointed in the process.
Yes.
So is there any action on the part of business officials in terms of the process, in terms of 4 years being sort of excessive, in terms of being intrusive in the district, in terms of being intrusive in a business office for that period of time? Or do you just let it go?
Well, that's a tough question because, you know, in certain instances, I think people feel like they don't want to rock the boat because they know what's going to come after them.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I know that there's lobbying that goes on with our statewide organization for different things. Like I said, they're lobbying to change that 4% limit because districts are saying it doesn't protect districts against financial loss. Thankfully, it's not our issue, but a lot of districts have had to pay a lot of money for some of these lawsuits with the victims, and changing that in that Victims Act. And they don't want it to completely deplete their savings because if they need to do something else, they don't have it. So again, that 4% isn't working for many districts when they're faced with an extraordinary circumstance. For us, it was Superstorm Sandy. For them, it's a lawsuit, a high number lawsuit. So I know there's lobbying going on different elements of these audit reports, but they try to do it through the state organization. So one particular district or several districts are not then, targeted in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeVito.
Thank you.
Thank you to the board members and their questions and comments. Any student organizations have any announcements? At this time, we're offering the opportunity for any questions and comments from the public on tonight's agenda items only. This time, if you'd like to come up to speak on tonight's agenda items, more than welcome, you have 3 minutes. Ms. Green?
Kristen Chesney, 61 Vinton. I appreciate that you've addressed this topic in the meeting tonight, and I also appreciate the banner that got added to the website to bring attention to your board meeting. Thank you for that. As stated in the comptroller's report, the board and district officials did not effectively manage the district's fund balance and did not present the district's spending plans in a transparent manner. I'm going to speak to that because while it might be old news, you continue to seek to close a school while the budget practices have been found to over-encumber expenses, and that feels relevant. I reviewed one of the years audited, the 2018-19 year, because it wasn't odd. And specifically, I looked at the mailer. This is the layperson outreach that goes to every single voter in the community. It isn't buried in a line by line or dependent upon having people present or watching, which tends to be pretty low attendance, as we see tonight. What I found was that in that mailer, we told the public we were set to save millions in costs due to a district refinancing that would save $2.2 million over 10 years, a board-approved contract with Honeywell to save $17 million in energy reductions over the next 18 years, and a net cash flow increase of $2.8 million. We're still in this period, yet costs have increased. I don't know. Where in the 2024-25 budget are we accounting for those savings, I thought. The mailer also mentions storm reimbursement, central to the counter argument of over-encumbering due to Superstorm Sandy. It states from us, the district does not anticipate any designation of fiscal stress in the near future based on sound financial planning and the amount of FEMA reimbursement funds received to date. A graph is included to show no designation of fiscal stress, yet we over-encumbered millions for this reason. I think this is where the claim of transparency comes into play. I will add that in your presentation, the photo shows a statement of fact that the district decided to withhold money or over-encumber expenses due to Sandy, not necessarily an approval or a suggestion from the auditor to do so. And nowhere in this mailer does it provide taxpayers information that we had a surplus that was being sent to the capital budget rather than fund instruction or used to reduce the tax levy. In fact, in this particular year, we increased the tax levy by 2.98%. So the point that I took from this report was that the decision that was made may have felt responsible, and I don't believe any money was misused in any way. I do believe the auditors demonstrate that, right? But I don't know if it was the decision of yours to be made is really how I walked away with this. I think it should be put transparently in the mailer so that it's clear to the public where you want large sums of money over the balance limits to go. Can I have another minute? Thank you. I should look at you, I'm sorry. I'm used to looking at you. Can I have another minute? Thank you.
I don't know if you want me to respond to any of this. Let me know if you want to see the response.
Yeah, I just have a couple
Let me
more
know if you want
comments.
to
I'll
respond.
be real quick, I promise. So what I'm also curious about is why some of the expenses for capital improvements were not paid out of with the bond. I thought that the bond was intended to handle a multi-year maintenance plan. It makes me concerned when I think about the recent bond proposal that came out in December, where we included $15 million for new construction marine biology lab, when we know we have these like big, important, expensive things that come up regarding our maintenance in our buildings. I am walking away a little bit confused because I don't know, to my knowledge, where any actual expenses are shared against what was budgeted, which also feels poor to the comptroller's report. I am a little disappointed to hear a lot of blame towards the state and the question of integrity to the auditor in such a blatant way. Thank you.
Sure, Mr. Vito, if you're comfortable responding to what.
So the first one, I'm having a little bit of trouble, having some trouble understanding some of the statements that you make, because it seems like you're putting different things together that are not related. For example, you talk about over-encumbering expenses. Can you tell me which expenses were over-encumbered besides the health insurance that I went through?
No, I don't
Which
have
expenses?
information on specifics of over encumbrances.
Because we don't know
What I was
over-encumbered
stating is
expenses.
exactly what was written in the comptroller's report.
And that's what I took issue with. Is
Correct.
that they state we over-encumbered expenses, but we didn't over-encumber, we encumbered based upon what might happen in terms of health insurance. That's why I highlighted that health insurance is correct. Now, they state we over-encumbered. They said we should have used historical average. And I showed you for 3 years where there was a very small increase, or when the rate actually went down, there was a variance, and that's what they're saying was over-encumbered. But if we did what they said we should have done, we wouldn't have had enough out of either 5 or 6 of those years. We wouldn't have had enough. So if you can send me an email, show me where you think we over-encumbered, because we don't over-encumber, we encumber, or we budget rather, is the more accurate term, for what is reasonably expected. And since health insurance did go up to over 10% for several years, and I highlighted that, and recently the rates were over 10%, we have to prepare for that. We don't know what the health insurance exactly is going to be January 1. So it's not over-encumbered, it's encumbering to protect the district so that we have enough. The audit report may say over-encumbered, it doesn't mean that's accurate. So if you want to show me in a separate time the specific items where we over-encumbered your words, I can certainly go over that with you, but I wouldn't necessarily take that word from the audit report and apply it generally, because it's not accurate. So that's one item I'd like to talk about.
Thank you.
In terms of
understand that.
I just want to finish.
Yeah,
Oh.
you're asking, you would ask.
No, I said,
And I know
if you
that
can-
we're not
just-
meant to have a back and forth. I also understand that you're upset that your integrity is being called into question. I'm not an auditor. I can't speak to what the things are that they found in their audit report. I can only quote them because they're the experts. So, thank you. I don't have any other questions that I asked.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Like, you have anything else you want to comment on?
Yeah, in terms of the savings from the refinancing, those were real savings that we had. If we're expected to spend, let's say, $1 million in cost of our debt service, and then that's reduced over a 10-year period, and it equates to $2.2 million, those are real savings. So again, I'm confused as to why you're questioning that. that was something that wasn't in the audit report, that you're bringing up, questioning that, the validity of that savings, and those were real savings. We refinance. No, not at this point, I just want to be able to respond. So when you refinance a home mortgage, many people are familiar with this, your debt service payment, let's say, is no longer at a certain level, it's lower because the interest rate's lower, and that's what we did for the district. That's real savings. Not quite sure why you're questioning that. And in terms of the capital projects in that particular mailer, maybe we didn't appropriate money for capital projects. They're gonna have to look back at that mailer that you're talking about, but that was outside of the audit years. So again, that's something that I wasn't going to talk about this evening, but like we've had many discussions offline over the past several months, like you send me emails questioning things that I've always responded to you, that may be a better mechanism for answering your specific questions, because without having the specific data that you're referring to, it's hard to do that in a forum like this. So I would just encourage you that if you do have really specific questions, or if you're making certain statements that aren't accurate, that I would prefer that you put that in an email so that we can respond to it. I can respond to it better. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment when you said that they're the experts. So Michael is our expert that's been here for an extremely long time and has done a tremendous job. And I think the board members and Michael discussed that the auditors that came in were less than professional or expert. So I personally take offense to you saying that, because you're making it sound as if Michael's not an expert and he knows his stuff better than anyone else on the board, in the room, and has also been extremely kind to you and community members. Whenever they do have questions, he responds in a professional manner. And so, I just want to make that clear that he is an expert in this, beyond an expert.
Yes, please, I'm not making
It's not a back and forth.
but you're all addressing me very directly. I'm not making a statement as to Mr. DeVito's character. You all owe the taxpayers information that state auditors are claiming was done in a way that was less than transparent. There have been zero answers of contrition in any way, shape, or form. I just don't think that's responsible.
So, okay, we appreciate your comments on that. Any other questions or comments from the public? Any agenda items? All right, good, moving on. Approval of minutes for executive session. Oh, sorry. Oh, I apologize, go ahead.
Karen Axelson, 668 Lincoln Boulevard. Thank you for the presentation and for the forum. There was something in the report that said the corrective action plan, I think, is due back within 90 days. So is that, where would we be able to find that? Is that something we'll be able to see? It'll be on the website. Okay. And then there was a survey I think I received by paper mail that kind of, we were asked to rank where we felt like certain projects were in terms of importance, like AC in the schools or whatever, better lunches, whatever it was. Will the results of that be made public, or how will you be using that information? That's on the website? Okay.
Yeah, those were presented, and I think we're gonna have another round if there's any changes.
Okay, thank you. And then will the decisions for how to use the surplus money be part of the communities, or is the corrective action plan kind of strictly determined by the board? Because I understood a piece of this tonight.
Well, there is no surplus. That's old news again.
Okay,
It's been 2 years since we had a surplus in the fund balance,
okay.
right?
So it's a
And that's-
corrective action to avoid that amount of
Well,
surplus?
again, it's kind of interesting what their recommendations are. That was, it had already been changed 2 years prior. So one of the recommendations was not to hold any money in the unassigned fund balance over 4%. It's been 2 years since we've had any money over that 4%. So the corrective action plan on that fund is, well, that's already been done when the district appropriated the money for the capital projects, that slide, for the high school bathrooms, for the steam, the hot water conversion for the new boilers at the middle school. That surplus was used for that purpose. So we don't have a surplus over the 4%. There's nothing really to say the whole community is gonna have a say in it going, because if we don't have it, we just have the 4%, which is something we're allowed to keep 4% in our unassigned fund balance. So
Maybe I phrased the question wrong. I guess in the corrective action plan, I think it's like, would you reduce the tax levy, would you spend money on capital projects, whatever. So is that decision, the type of action plan you would take up to the board, or is there any community involvement in that? Just wondering the process.
That's really a board decision.
Okay, and then my last is really just a comment, Dr. Ryan, you actually addressed it, so thank you, but I was wondering that, if you feel, and if there are other districts that do feel that, 4% is not a reasonable amount, what are we doing to then lobby for that? But I think you answered that question, that there'd rather be anonymity.
And I think, just to add to that, 40% of the school districts in New York State keep more than 4% in fund balance, just to put some perspective on that. And I think both groups are lobbying as a group to say that amount needs to be raised.
You make me
State municipalities have up to 15%. So it's interesting that school districts are more restricted even than government agencies.
Thank you.
Thank you. This time, any more questions or comments from the public on tonight's agenda items? Okay, great. Approval of minutes for executive session, reorg, and regular meeting on August 13th, 2024.
Motion made.
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Conway?
Yes.
Ms. Belsey?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Case?
Yes.
And I vote yes. At this time, I'm going to move the meeting over to the superintendent for her presentation. So, the superintendent.
Thank you. I'd ask the board to consider item 1, certificated personnel as amended.
Motion.
Second.
Oh, Nora, and then Andy. Any discussion?
What is the amendment?
Oh, one second.
Dr. Patel, you just want to go over how it's amended?
Sure. On page 3, item H, it's clarifying that it will be assigned as 0.9 at the middle school and 0.1 at the middle school. On page 6, item Q, the musical production director will be Stan Shanson and not Leslie Cohen. And item U, Sarah Heiss will actually be removed from item U and added to item T. She will be working as a pre-K teacher assistant.
That'll be on this next month.
That will be reflected in the, no, it's still a teaching assistant, just a different program, different number of hours. You're welcome.
Any other discussion? Ms. Belsey? Oh, yeah, you made the motion, you seconded, right?
I'd say yes.
Ms. Conway?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Case?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
And I'd like to introduce some of our newly appointed teachers who are here tonight. Ryan Smith, who will be English at the high school.
Wait.
Just wait. Lauren Gentiles, who will be at West.
Wait.
Leslie Cole, who will be our new theater arts English teacher at the high school. Erna Driscoll, who will also be at West. And Maybelline Arajo, who will be Spanish at the middle school.
Welcome.
Welcome. Can I ask the board to consider item 2 non-certificated personnel?
Motion made.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Belsey?
Yes.
Ms. Conway?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Pace?
Yes.
And I vote yes.
And I ask the board to consider items 3 through 9 together.
Is there a motion?
Motion. Second.
Any discussion?
6 have anything to do with fund balance?
Mr. DeVito, you want to take that one?
I did.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
Does 6 have anything to do with fund balance, the budget transfers?
No. The budget transfer is number 6.
Yeah.
Well, if we didn't transfer the funds to pay for these outstanding invoices, then sure, we would have money in the fund balance, but then we also wouldn't be paying our bills. So,
I'm just trying to use context.
yeah.
One thing I like to notice, we're doing this disposition of obsolete equipment. We actually had more items to dispose of, but we decided to repurpose a pickup truck and let our shop let us take care of it and hopefully rebuild it, so it'll be kind of great to see that happen.
Yeah, that's exciting.
Yeah. Any other comments on the board?
I just have,
Discussion?
I just want to say I'm very happy that we're going to do the student space flight experiment again. I know it's expensive, but the students really seem to enjoy it quite a bit.
It was amazing to be on the watch party last fall, to see all those middle school kids watching as their rocket was launched. It was pretty cool.
Great. Any other comments, discussion from the board? Ms. Belsi?
Yes.
Ms. Conway?
Yes.
Dr. Ryan?
Yes.
Ms. Pace?
Yes.
And I vote yes. Board of Education, any new or old business vetting? Ms. Conway?
Well, I would just like to ask about the high school. Our high school really offers so many programs to all of our students. And I would just, if possible, could you give us the specifics regarding just the college courses that are being offered to our students?
Sure. So in addition to our AB and IB offerings, AP and IB, we also offer a lot of dual enrollment programs. So we have relationships with Malloy, we have relationships with Nassau Community College, Syracuse University with Project Advance, and Suffolk, and Farmingdale. And we just actually started a relationship with University of Albany College and High School for our research program. So we're looking to foster that connection as well, so that we can offer even more opportunities for our students. So these courses range everything from writing to American history, pre-calculus, math and statistics. We also have an art and photography class. It's one of our Farmingdale programs. And then our CTE accredited programs. We have our auto program and TV and film, which is affiliated with Suffolk credit. And so we offer a real repertoire of courses and for dual enrollment in addition to AP and IB. So it's something we're really proud of and something we hope to make even more visible to all of our students.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful too, because as parents face the college and the tuition of colleges, being able to have your students take college courses in the high school really are very helpful for everybody. So thank you for all that hard work.
Thank you.
Any other board members?
Oh,
Sorry.
good luck, the beginning of school next week. I bet you everybody's so excited.
Waiting for it.
Congratulations, kids, all have their new backpacks and some new teachers and the new coffee cups and, little lunch bags. So good luck to everybody starting school. Yes.
Doc?
I just wanted to know, should we deal with the school, we have to staff, bus drivers, aides, teachers, administrators, TAs, building grounds, and all the others, people, are we okay with that, ready to go?
So yes, we are in pretty good shape. We have a leave replacement that we still need to hire, but the posting hasn't even closed yet, so we'll be right on top of that. We always need teacher assistants and teaching assistants and teacher aides. We double up until all positions are filled, but certainly I have postings out on the webpage. People can apply on once. And we just posted today for 2 full-time TAs at Lido due to some resignations on this agenda. We will open with staff, might not be the permanent staff that will remain there, but our principals do a fabulous job of making sure everything is covered in place.
Great, thank you.
Space?
I have nothing. Just
Great.
good luck to everybody at the school.
Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of the summer.
Congrats to all the parents who moved their recent graduates up to college. I think that was an exciting time for everybody and probably tiring as well. Any questions from the public on any item? Comments? Yeah.
I just wanted to ask, now that we've discussed all of this other stuff, I know that it seems like being a dead horse, but is closing these stuff people now? I do have to ask.
So we actually presented about this 2
2 weeks ago?
Yeah. And where we are kind of now is in a pattern of looking at what possibilities would be used for the building if we did have to make that decision, so that we have a little more preparation if that comes to fruition. So we're still kind of in a holding pattern.
So in a holding pattern, but it's not, what is.
It's not off the table.
No, it's not off the table. And that's why any teachers that are being hired now are going to West, right?
No, that really doesn't have to be,
Doesn't have
that
anything.
is just where people, where we have vacancies.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the public on any items? Great, seeing, at that time, Long Beach Classroom Teachers Association, welcome.
Thank you, Karen Bloom, LBCTA. First, thank you to Mr. DeVito for the presentation and in our eyes for being always transparent with the district, with the public, with the association. He works very closely with us, and I just want to thank you for all of that. We would also like to congratulate and welcome all the teachers being appointed tonight. We look forward to working together in the upcoming school year and enjoy the last 2 days of summer. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Can I just say something?
Yeah.
I just want to congratulate you on your new position as president of the CTA. I know you're going to be a wonderful addition to. Thank you very much.
You're right, yeah, that's it. You're a former member, you, right? Administrative, supervisory, and PPS group, any announcements? Great, Long Beach SEA, School Employees Association. PTA, PTSA? All right then, with that being said, can I have a motion for adjournment?
Motion. Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Have a great night, everyone.